and Lisa, we decided, let's take this content information we have and let's bring it out, through a virtual platform. And what started out as an informal discussion has really grown and has been received extremely well by individuals, families, and agencies. The benefit of Peggy and Lisa having this exchange is that Peggy, as a school psychologist, looks at the world one way. Lisa, as a parent advocate, looks at the world through her experiences. And the beauty of our project is having the practitioner and the parent in a unified one voice perspective of how to be present for families and individuals. So today's topic is how to let change happen and dealing with change. So at this point, and all of it is grounded in the foundation of mindfulness. And this is something that we wanted to say early on. We're encouraging people to use mindfulness, to be able to meditate. But we are under no illusion that we're talking, always about a yoga mat and sitting down for 45 minutes. We're really talking almost like a micro meditation or a pause thought about doing something different in order to be able to change the way that not the other person is acting, but the way that you're acting and the way that you are reacting. And every person that I've ever talked to that has a meditation practice, including Lisa, talks about it starts off very small, very simple, and then you build it across time. So with that, I'd like to introduce both Peggy and Lisa, and I'd like to turn it over to them.
Hi, I think I'm going to start today with how to let change happen and dealing with change. So the definition of change is the act or intent of making or becoming different. And we all deal with change differently. But the premise of change oftentimes is that it's frightening for us because it's an unknown and we want to change something that we are doing or accept change that's happening around us. And that can be very scary or create fear. Change requires effort. And, the process, it's a process, not an event. I'm going to end that phone call for 1 second. I don't know who. Okay, sorry. So again, change is a process. It's not a specific event, and it takes time. And often, I think, in general, people sort of avoid what they're not sure of. So change can be different, as I said before, for different people and different types of personalities. There are some personality people who take change very easily, who try different things often and are very comfortable with that. And then there are people who are much more set in their ways, who sort of like the way things are and don't like to change as readily. And I think for the most part, most of people fall somewhere in the middle. There are things that you can change and will change and try to change. And then there are some things that because they're difficult, or maybe you're not really committed to the change, you sort of let go and stay in the same place. Intent is the biggest predictor of positive change. And so when we intend to change because we want to, because it has some kind of relevance for us, that it makes us a better or capable person, then that change is easiest. Behavior is very complex. And so there are different kinds of change. I mean, what we're talking today about is how to have your children, or family members for that matter, accept changes. So there are different strategies. There is a behavioral strategy that includes trying to help a person change a behavior, either a negative behavior or a positive behavior, and then accept that change. And then there's just generalized change that might happen in the world, similar to what's happening out there in the world today. The COVID virus caused us to all change our behaviors and kind of stay inward and stay at home. So I'm going to try to break those two areas down a little bit. So behaviorists feel that in order to make a change, there are certain steps that you follow to make a change and then grow to accept that change. And the first step is to look at the ultimate goal, whatever that behavior ultimately is, wherever you want to get to. So for example, if it's, you know, losing weight or being more active or whatever your change is, to take that goal and separate it into smaller and smaller steps so that you can accomplish a specific step relative to that ultimate goal. So the little step, and then the next little step, and the next little step, and ultimately all those little steps lead to that final goal, hopefully. They believe that you should keep the process simple. And I think that's a key factor, because I think what we do is we look at, I want to get somewhere and I want to get there fast. And so instead, if we break it down to small steps and keep those steps small and simple, it's an easier way, shall we say, to accomplish that ultimate goal. While you're doing those behavioral strategies, or while you're performing those behavioral strategies, you have to be prepared for setbacks, because it's not always a straight trajectory towards the goal. Sometimes you go forward, you take 2 steps forward, maybe 1 step back. So you have to prepare yourself for those kinds of things. And monitor your behavior and your steps along the way, because like anything else, things might change towards the goal. So we have to do all of that review and modification, and some self kind of modification and review. Also ask others, you know, I'm working towards exercising more frequently. How do you think I'm doing? I went out 3 times this week as opposed to no times last week. So get, feedback from other people. And then practice. No behavioral change comes without practice. And you have to understand that very small steps are really ultimately big steps. And I think that's difficult for most people because we want to just get there. So those are the ways to change behaviors. And you can practice those with your children in trying to get your children to change how they operate. If we want to talk about how we want to change as a construct, as an emotional construct, there are other ways to help children to change the way they sort of look at the world and accept change. And that's, I think, a different kind of way of looking at this topic of change. So the first thing is speak with your child about what's happening. So for example, in today's world with coronavirus, explain, try to, and again, this is dependent upon age and ability level and so on and so forth, but explain what's happening. Tell them why they're not in school. Tell them why they can't see their friends, or what we can do in lieu of those things, and try to make the best explanation given age again and understanding level. Explain to your child, or try to convey, that change is part of life for all of us. And so we all have to deal with some form of change throughout our lives. And often it happens frequently that we have to change how we do business. For a child who perhaps is going to change their school, or change a family structure, or change their environment, maybe you're moving in your house, give them forewarning as much as possible, without too much detail, but some detail about what you know and when it's going to happen and so on and so forth. And then answer any questions they might have about that as best possible. There are some things in today's world that are unknown. And so we have to just try to be as consistent and as concrete as possible with children, and in explaining what we do know. If you are changing environments and structures and houses and so on and things like that, try to keep everything else that happens in your child's life as consistent as possible. So if you're going to move, maybe you try to keep the bedtime schedule the same, and the playtime schedule the same, and all the other scheduling kinds of things that happen in the world for children, keep them as consistent as possible. We have to always and accept a child's feelings about the change, and acknowledge those feelings, and review those feelings with them, and know that specifically for areas like grieving, children don't grieve like adults, And so they may seem very disinterested in the grief process. They might, and it's not that they're disinterested, it's just their way of handling things, especially developmentally, is different than perhaps the adult way to handle things. For your child, wherever possible, perhaps offer them choices. If you're going to change their home, do you want to have this room? Do you want to have this room color? Do you want to have upstairs, downstairs? Just try to give them some choices so that they kind of buy into the system and they buy into the changes that are readily happening with them. Stay positive, and that's kind of hard to do, I think, sometimes in today's world, but as best possible, convey some positive feelings about whatever the situation and circumstances are to your child. And try to help your children find something positive in their life. Last week we talked about a brag box, but this week perhaps, have them list some things that are positive in their life and review those things with them. You can, we have a dog, we have a house, we have a beautiful garden. Things that you can think of that the child thinks are positive, encourage those kinds of things and then review those things with your child so that the world is not always this sort of negative, difficult place. One of the things that I thought was pretty clear and very specific was try not to make your anxiety their anxiety. And we've talked about anxiety in the past, but that's a pretty critical thing for children because as parents become anxious, they convey those anxieties, not meaning to necessarily, but to their children. And so sometimes trying to relax in the face of the change or relax it in the front of your children and then perhaps, with your adult friends and neighbors, then talk about your anxieties someplace else, but try to keep that away from your children. And then try to make sure that children don't blame themselves for change. You see this oftentimes in divorce situations, that they think it was something that they did, that mommy and daddy or the parent structure isn't getting along. And so you have to review those things with your children and sort of make sure that they're not playing the blame game to themselves. There are some games that you could play with children to sort of help instill some changes. And some of the things and some of them are very simple. And one of the things that I looked at was a game called Change Your Seat. And so what you do is just what it says. If you typically would sit at a particular seat at the table, maybe tonight for dinner, everybody changes our seats, we all rotate. And then process with your children, how did that feel? What did that feel like? Because usually I sit in that seat, and now today I'm sitting at this seat. I have a different perspective on the environment, and I have a different feel for what's happening at the table. And you could do that in the car, except for the driver, of course, but you can do that in the car. You can do that at the table. You can do that if you usually sit in certain parts in your living area while you're watching TV, whatever. So just change it up a little, I guess, is the kind of thing. There was another game called Change Your Look. So what you do is you have the child look at you or look at someone, and then they, kind of digest what they're seeing, and then they turn their back and you do something different. You put on a wig, put on a hat, put on a mustache, whatever, change your look in some way, and then have the child turn around and then see what they, ask them what they see that's different, and then kind of talk about those changes. Those are all little things that we can do to help children adapt to changes that are small and that eventually become larger. If your child plays a game with you and they usually are first, then you can make them be not first, so they can understand what the second position feels like, or the third position, or if they always are the line leader, perhaps, and we talked about this last week too, perhaps they're not the line leader this week. So, there's different ways of changing things that will help your child sort of adapt. There are many books that you can read about change, and they sort of help children understand what change is all about. And then certainly, and I'm going to turn this over to Lisa now, but there are ways of dealing with changing environments through a meditative and a relaxed kind of position.
All right. Thank you, Peggy. Yeah, you brought up some really good points. So hi, everybody. So here I come from the perspective of interchange. And there was a quote, I really like this. I read by Karen Kaiser Clark that said, "Life is change. Growth is optional. Choose wisely." And truthfully, change is the only constant in our lives. We're changing every moment. Our bodies are constantly changing. The world around us, God knows, is constantly changing. And by learning to embrace change, we avoid the resistance of holding on and suffering because things are not what we wish them to be. Acknowledge change. Let it happen and unfold instead of approaching it from a place of denial and resistance. Not everything is going to turn out the way that you want it. And, you're bringing up a really good point with these ideas, for children, Peggy. Things are going to change whether you want them to or not. And how you handle that is what makes all the difference. You brought this up a little bit, Peggy, about acknowledging that change is a process. You brought up like the idea of change, if you want to change, like you want to change your weight, you want to change something personal, but also there's a change and obviously about the environment, if things happen outside of our control. And you have to acknowledge that change is a process. And there could be a grieving period if you do something. If there's great change in our lives, there can be an ending, a grieving for what was. And you want to allow yourself to process this experience and not try to push it away. Allow yourself to feel the emotions. And you brought this up, Peggy, feel the emotions and come to terms with what you've lost. And everybody handles this differently, and there is no magic formula for getting through this. Then there's a transition period. And this is where the pause comes in. There's like a free floating or not fully landed yet in where the change is leading to. And I think we're all in this like free floating stage right now in this world. Things are moving beyond your control. You want to acknowledge the feeling that you feel ungrounded. Your mind will want to take control and get things moving quickly, but sometimes it just takes time. And you want to be patient and compassionate with yourself. Patience and compassion, I always come back to that one. And then there's the new beginnings of settling in and, where the change is coming to its natural point of transition and where it's settling. And, maybe you can have a little perspective now and being able to look back and see the process of where it started and where you're ending up. Acceptance. I'm saying this a lot, the acceptance and acknowledge. When you accept, embrace, and learn from change, you inevitably grow stronger. And even if you feel afraid, and that's a good point to bring up with children, feeling afraid of change. We all respond differently. Some people are more flexible. Some can be angry, defeated, upset, or disappointed as life unfolds differently than we anticipate. But the flexibility is what's important. And acceptance is not necessarily about liking something or agreeing with it. It's about simply acknowledging what is happening, what is true in this moment. And the more we can accept each moment as it is, the less we suffer. When we're more accepting to our circumstances, there's an opportunity for growth, and then we have the possibility of seeing solutions more clearly. There's a serenity prayer, which I'm sure everybody is familiar with, which says, "Grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference." Meditation is all about giving you the wisdom to know the difference and to change the only thing you can, which is yourself. And that releases the attachment to the things we cannot control. And the first step towards that is awareness, which is transforming into someone who can ride the wave of change rather than be its victim by holding on and not letting it go where it's naturally going to go. So I want to bring a little meditation into this. And all right, let's just get started. And first step we all know, which is settling into our body. Seeing if you could be 10% more comfortable in the space you're in. Maybe it's like wiggling a little bit, changing your position, just kind of letting the tension out. And then connecting to our breath. Settling your attention on the place in your body where you feel the breath the most, where you most easily experience your breath. We're just going to let it be. We're just going to let it be natural and normal. No need to try to change anything. Let your breath be what it is. If it feels shallow, if it feels deep, if it feels whatever it is, accept where it is. Okay. And when you sit for a few moments, feeling your breath, your mind is going to wander. Just come back to your breath. Meditation is the practice of 1,000 returns. You're just beginning again without judgment. You're bringing your attention back to your breath without criticizing yourself. You're not criticizing the fact that your mind wanders. Your mind is doing what it's supposed to do and designed to do, which is think. But what you want to do is give it a chance to relax, which is where we come back into our body to feel our breath. Now, some moments of meditation, and this happens to me all the time, some will feel easy, focused, relaxed. And it's easy to accept those moments. Oh yeah, this is like really nice. I'm really doing a good job here. I really feel relaxed. And you see the judgment in that it's like, oh yeah, I'm doing a good job. You have to be aware of where that mind is going. Other moments may feel unpleasant. You may feel restless or uncomfortable. But you want to see if you can hold those moments in the same exact quality of open curiosity and acceptance as those moments that may feel easier. Just want to allow each moment to be as it is. And if any thoughts are coming into your mind, notice if you're wishing that something was different. You might wish your back wasn't hurting, or you even that this meditation would be over already. You just accept whatever comes up for you. And can you let these thoughts drift away as you come back to your breath? Each time your mind wanders and you come back to your breath, you have an opportunity to let go of the past and be present in this new moment without judgment and with curiosity and acceptance. And all these little steps, like you said, Peggy, become big steps. And learning the value of the pause, be kind and compassionate with yourself. Wishing you a blessed journey. Thank you.
Well, once again, the two of you and Elaine, I'd ask for your comments as well, but the two of you have just, once again, you've hit it out of the park. And what do I mean by that? Because you brought together the behavioral perspective and the meditative perspective. And if you were really to tease out language, you're really both saying the same thing, but from different eyes. You know, the small changes. You know, Peggy, your whole focus on the idea of, you know, the small changes, the practice component. You know, if you look, and one of the things that when we send this out, when myself and Elaine and Jeffrey weekly send this material out, one of the things you'll find is you'll find attachments, not only our e-newsletter, but also the written comments and kind of like the steps that both Peggy and Lisa put a lot of effort into developing. And I think that they're really good. They're crisp, they're clean, they're realistic. And I think that when you think about it, because Peggy, you know, from the behavioral perspective, next thing you know, you hear her talking about intention. And then you, Lisa, come on from the meditative perspective and you start talking about intention. And then Peggy starts talking about small steps. And then you start talking about small steps and practice and this non-judgment. You know, look, you know, in the world of the human condition, we all have stuff. And it's been amplified underneath these conditions. You know, I know that what you're doing matters. And how do I know that? By the comments that I'm receiving. You know, I've had agencies contact me and ask me, could they use your presentation, the two of you, as an in-service? Absolutely. I've had a municipality contact me and ask me, could they put up your material on their Think Differently website? Absolutely. So what started off as an informal discussion, all of a sudden, you know, here we are, you know, 10 weeks in and continuing on. Elaine, would you like to comment? I see Elaine is there. I'm not sure. Go ahead, Elaine.
I was just unmuting myself. No, I agree. I think that the wisdom of what you were saying about taking things one step at a time or in small steps and how to adjust to change are just spot on.